is M-A-R-I-S-A. Mauro is M-A-U-R-O.
And what do you do for a living?
I'm a licensed psychologist.
How long have you been a licensed psychologist?
I've been licensed since 2009 in California and Texas since 2010.
And can you give us your educational background?
Yes, I obtained a doctorate in psychology in 2007. My program, I went to university. My program was accredited by the American Psychological Association in school psychology. I also have a master's degree in school psychology. I also attended law school, although I'm not an attorney. I left law school in my 4th semester after deciding I didn't want to be an attorney. I have a bachelor's of science in psychology from St. John Fisher College.
And after finishing school, how have you been employed?
I've been employed as a psychologist.
For whom?
In 2008, I began working for the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. That is the prison system in California. From there, I then moved back to Texas in 2010. I was initially employed by DRO's Behavioral Mental Health. From there, I opened my own practice, and during that time, I've also worked locum tenens or as needed at the Montgomery County Mental Health Treatment Facility.
And have you testified in courts before as a psychologist?
Yes, I have.
And what is the purpose of your testimony today?
The purpose of my testimony today is to discuss my findings related to Mr. Daniels' case.
Based on an evaluation you made of him?
That's correct, and a review of the records.
Can you summarize your findings that you intend to testify for us today?
That's not where I was on qualifications.
It is, but it's possible we may move to suppress her findings depending on what they are. So we'd like
But
to...
the fact that she is allowed to testify as to her findings is based on her qualifications. So we don't need to take that part outside the presence of the jury and delay it further.
I think we have the right to question whether there's a scientific basis to her findings prior to her testifying about those findings.
Well, I guess you can definitely testify as to what she has based her findings on as far as her expertise, as part of her qualifications. But just to have a second hearing as to what they are and then repeat it once the jury comes in, I don't think you do have a right to do that. But you can certainly ask her on what basis she based her findings without going into what they are, because the request was more down as to her qualifications, because she has not testified as to any conclusions as of yet.
I have to check the rule, just very briefly, Your Honor. I'm sorry, I didn't pull it up on me. Okay, Ms. Morrow, the basis for the opinions you intend to testify about are your training and education. Is that correct?
My training, education, knowledge of the literature, research, as well, including the DSM.
Fair enough. And did you perform any either personality tests on Mr. Daniel or any psychopathy checklist or anything of that nature?
No, I was instructed not to.
Okay. And did you complete any of those types of evaluations not based on your interview with Mr. Daniel? In other words, based on information that you reviewed, but not based on the interview with Mr. Daniel?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, it's my understanding that the hair psychopathy checklist is a guided interview where you interview the defendant and he answers certain questions and then you interpret that. My question is whether you intend to testify about findings that would have been found in that had you been able to interview him about that without having actually interviewed him about that.
Well, I'll need to make a correction first before I can answer that. The hair psychopathy, the PCLR, is actually based on a review of the records where more emphasis is placed on that records because it is a historical instrument, not just an evaluation of an interview captured by somebody in the moment during a brief interview. But no, I have not completed the PCLR based on collateral records either.
Fair enough. Your Honor, we have no objection at this time to Ms. Morrow's being able to testify.
Will you state and spell your name, please?
Yes, it is Marisa Morrow, M-A-R-I-S-A, M-A-U-R-O.
And what do you do for a living?
I'm a licensed psychologist.
How long have you been a licensed psychologist?
I've been licensed since 2009.
And can you describe for us your educational and professional background?
Yes, I obtained a doctorate in psychology in 2007 from Alfred University. My program was accredited by the American Psychological Association in school psychology, and I've also obtained a master's degree in school psychology. Prior to entering the master's program, I had attended law school. I left in my 4th semester after deciding I did not want to be an attorney. Prior to that, I obtained a bachelor's of science in psychology.
And after receiving your degree in psychology, how have you been employed?
I've been employed as a psychologist.
Where?
I was first employed after obtaining my doctorate by the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. That is the prison system in California. I was employed there postdoctorally and then remained for another year and a half after my postdoctoral year. When I moved back to Texas in 2010, I was initially employed by Deer Oaks Mental Health. I also simultaneously opened my own practice where I began practicing on my own clinical and forensic psychology. During that time, I ceased working for Deer Oaks because my private practice was taking most of my time. And I also worked for the Montgomery County Mental Health Treatment Facility, which is a forensic hospital in Montgomery County.
And in reference to this particular case, did you make an evaluation of Brandon Daniel?
Yes, I did.
And was part of that based on an interview of Brandon Daniel?
That's correct.
And when was Mr. Daniel made available to you to interview?
I interviewed him on February 17th of this year.
And in addition to an interview with Mr. Daniel, did you review any records, and if so, what?
Yes, I did. I interviewed a probable cause affidavit for arrest, which is essentially a summary for his arrest. I also interviewed various videos. I also viewed various videos, and that is his interrogation video. I viewed a video of him in the back seat of a squad car. I also viewed some surveillance video from Walmart. I reviewed maybe somewhere near 1,000 pages of mental health records and documents from the jail. I also viewed some educational records, although I viewed those after my initial evaluation of Mr. Daniel.
And in addition to that, were you given access to any members of Mr. Daniel's family or anything such as that?
No, I was not.
And were there limitations placed on the purpose and scope of your evaluation?
Yes, there were a number of limitations.
And what limitations were you given regarding your evaluation and your conclusions?
I was allowed to interview Mr. Daniel regarding his depression and family of origin issues. I was allowed to interview him regarding his substance use, regarding the effects of his depression and substance abuse on him before, during, and after the offense. I was allowed to interview him regarding his prognosis for recovery from depression and substance abuse related issues. And lastly, I was allowed to interview him regarding his adjustment to incarceration.
And just beginning with a general sense, what was your impression or how did he appear to you when you interviewed him?
When I interviewed Mr. Daniel, he was polite with me. He was cooperative, though that cooperation, in my opinion, was extremely superficial. He responded mostly yes and no to questions. He appeared to sort of intellectualize them, give me just basic symptoms without any descriptors. He wasn't able to provide or chose not to provide details even when questioned and re-questioned. He appeared to get a little bit frustrated with me when I would ask him if he could tell me more information over and over again throughout the interview because I was getting very little detail from him. His thoughts were organized, they were goal-directed, they were linear. There was no evidence of thought disorganization that would be, for example, consistent with psychosis. His thoughts were also absent any bizarre content, again, which suggests that there was no indication of psychosis. His mood, when I asked him about that, he stated that he was just anxious to get trial over with so he could move on. His affect, or his expression that he showed on his face was very flat, markedly flat throughout the entire nearly 3-hour interview. It was very emotionless. There was no change in expression no matter what topic or content we were discussing. His attention and concentration appeared intact. In my opinion, he did not appear forthcoming because of the lack of detail that he provided. He did not appear to have any problems with immediate or delayed recall or ability to store information. But despite that, and despite the fact that he was able to relay information about his personal history, I found that his account to me was probably quite unreliable because of the number of inconsistencies in the account that he provided me versus the records that I was able to review about his history. I found his intellect or his intellectual capacity to be likely within the above average range. However, I did not test him. So it was surprising to me the little detail that he was able to provide me about himself, about his feelings, about his past, in spite of that higher than average intellect. Memory is typically consistent with intellect. So usually if somebody has a high intellect, they also have a high memory capacity as well.
And I want to ask you about one of the things you said. You said he had a tendency to intellectualize everything. What does that mean?
When somebody is attempting to intellectualize something or their responses show an intellectualization of the question, that suggests that the person is trying to give you maybe a rote answer or an answer where they are trying to evade giving actual personal information about themselves. They're trying to be guarded, closed off.
Fair to say that they're trying to figure out why you want to know and give you only the information they want you to know.
That's correct.
And in this trial, we've heard of diagnoses of Mr. Daniel, specifically that he had a diagnosis of major depression, severe and recurrent. Would that be consistent with your findings or observations?
No, it would not.
Why not?
In order to meet criteria for a major depressive episode, most clinicians practicing in the United States rely on the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, otherwise referred to as the DSM. That manual is now in its 5th edition. In order to meet criteria for major depression, which is an actual clinical diagnosis and not just a lay term or something that we throw around readily, you have to actually meet the criteria that is established in the DSM. And I did not find any evidence from my interview of Mr. Daniel, and that includes my clinical observations as well as his self-report, or in the 2 years of mental health records that I reviewed from the jail, and he received regular treatment in the jail, or in the prior records that I had available that would support a diagnosis of major depressive disorder.
And in both of his Travis County Correction Center and Brackenridge records, they indicate a diagnosis of depression. Can you address that?
Yes, they did not initially indicate a diagnosis of depression. The initial indication was adjustment disorder in the jail. Adjustment disorder may have depressive symptoms or anxious symptoms and or both. Adjustment disorder is diagnosed when someone is experiencing an above average or an unusual amount of difficulty adjusting to a stressor. Coming into jail, coming into prison, being charged with an offense, for some people may be very difficult. And so you need to consider whether or not they're displaying more difficulty than the average person in that situation. They did diagnose Mr. Daniel with that. However, I did not see, and they did not document any evidence that he was displaying unusual difficulty adjusting to jail. He actually displayed shockingly little difficulty adjusting to jail beyond one attempted suicide.
And since you've hit on it, have you reviewed the records from that attempted suicide?
Yes, I have.
And is it your opinion that he did in fact take a large number of pills while at the Travis County Jail?
He reported that he did. It seems like there was some decompensation in his mental status at some point after he entered the hospital, so that is consistent with taking some type of pills, yes.
And what does the fact that the decompensation occurred at the hospital rather than before arrival indicate as far as timing?
Well, in corroboration of that, he also, after he took the pills, he reported that himself to the jail officers, that he took these pills and that he was feeling nauseous. So that suggested to me that maybe he probably did take some pills, but there is some possibility that then he immediately saw treatment, and then when he got to the hospital, you did not see the decompensation significantly until they started questioning him during the intake, where they noted that he began to really decompensate, appear confused, and had some cognitive problems. So to me, that indicated that there's some possibility that this suicide attempt was more of a gesture.
And you're not saying that he didn't take the pills, just that by immediately reporting that fact, that's less significant to you? Is that...
It raises some questions regarding the actual intent of taking those pills. I can't say for certain either way, but it does raise some questions.
And you indicated that the diagnosis of major depression has specific indicators. Did you ask Mr. Daniel about those specific indicators?
Yes, I did.
And can you describe his answers and what you found from them?
Well, what I did initially, because I do not like to lead people during the interview by asking them right off the bat specific indicators that I'm looking for, because most people, particularly intelligent people like Mr. Daniel, can figure that out, what you're doing, and they might endorse or not endorse depending upon how they are trying to manage your impression of them. So what I did initially was ask him about how he's been feeling, if he's been treated for anything in jail. He discussed being treated for depression. And so I asked him, well, how does he know that he was depressed? And he discussed that the suicide attempt that he had in jail was what first alerted him as to his depression. So I asked him then to describe the feelings that he experiences as a result of that depression. And what he stated was that he feels anxious, nervous, and he feels lethargic. So I then asked him to let me know how that impacts his behavior. He wasn't really able to provide any information there. I asked him to let me know what thoughts maybe caused those feelings, because thoughts and feelings are interrelated, and we do not feel things in absence of thoughts. So I anticipated that he might tell me about worry about his case or worry about family. He did not bring up anything on his own. And so despite repeated questioning and repeated response patterns of feeling anxious, nervous, and lethargic, I wasn't able to get any additional details about his reported depression without questioning him directly about known symptoms. When I did question him about known symptoms, he denied those symptoms.
And during the course of your conversation with Mr. Daniel, did you ask him about his years growing up as a teen?
Yes, I did.
And what was his description of his life as a teen?
He stated to me that it was pretty normal, were his words. So I asked him to describe what problems he was having, what issues he was having during those years, because it seemed asserted to me that he was having some issues. So he was pretty resistant to discussing that, and he wasn't able to identify anything on his own. So I had to sort of lead him through, what was difficult about childhood, what was difficult about your teen years. And with much prompting, he was able to relay that his parents had divorced. He'd stated around 10 or 11 years old. He identified having a few friends and acquaintances, but he wished that he'd had more friends at times. He was also able to relay that at times he felt like his mother was emotionally abusive to him. When I asked him to describe that, he stated that she would sometimes bring up the fact that he was doing poorly in school or that he did not have a lot of friends.
And did he relay to you a suicide attempt at 16?
Yes, he did.
What did he tell you about that?
He stated that he attempted to kill himself by carbon monoxide poisoning in the garage. I asked him if he received treatment or was hospitalized. He denied that. I asked him how he survived it. He stated that his mother was home at the time and she caught him. So I asked him that, despite that, she didn't feel the need to refer him for treatment, and he said no. I asked him if he received maybe therapy or counseling after that, and he said no.
And did he mention to you any head trauma or head injuries in his childhood?
No, he did not.
Did he describe to you a relationship he had with a long-term relationship he had with a girlfriend?
No, he did not.
He did talk about his ex-girlfriend.
He spoke with me about one ex-girlfriend that he had here. I guess they moved to Austin together, and they were together for about 4 years.
And did he make any reference to a suicide attempt involving her?
A gesture, yes.
And what is a gesture?
A gesture, as opposed to an attempt, is a clinical term that we use to distinguish something that may or may not be or does not rise to the level of a suicide attempt, or maybe the intent of that attempt was not really to die. So what he stated to me regarding that was that he had, after he and his girlfriend broke up, he was speaking to her on the phone, and he had threatened to kill himself using a gun that she knew he had.
And did he follow up with any further explanation of that?
No.
Did he tell you why he did that?
When I asked him, specifically I had to prompt him. He did not provide any any details without prompting. He provided that he had hoped that he did that because he had hoped that maybe she would return to him or she would come back to the relationship.
And in reference to his claims of anxiety, nervousness, and lethargy, did you review the Travis County jail records?
Yes, I did.
And did those records support those claims?
No, they do not.
How so?
There's no report from him besides being anxious or anticipating getting through trial and moving on to the next phase of his life, of being anxious or nervous. There was no clinical indicators or no objective observations from the staff that he appeared nervous or anxious. He seemed to be sleeping appropriately. He adjusted very well to the jail life as far as accepting it. He was readily started getting out and socializing with other inmates before he was isolated. He was engaging in daily activities. He was reading, he was writing. When he had a radio, he was listening to that. They didn't document any signs or symptoms that would be consistent with anxiety.
And were those records consistent with someone who avoided contact with others?
No, he sought contact with others. He was very upset that he was angry that he was isolated for so long, and felt that he was being treated unfairly. Those are statements that he did make and that were recorded in the documents. He wanted to get out and socialize, play cards, dominoes with the other inmates, who he referred to, or at least the providers documented that he'd referred to as friends.
And you indicated at one time that his anxiousness was about getting this trial over and moving on to the next phase of his life. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Is that consistent with major depression?
No, it is not. And in my experience in working with inmates, usually inmates who are facing a very serious charge or potentially a life sentence or an execution are extremely nervous and worried and apprehensive.
And you indicated that part of your interview was designated to family of origin issues. First of all, what does that mean?
In my opinion, that means that maybe there was some kind of problem in his immediate family life.
And were you able to make any conclusions or findings as to his family of origin issues?
Again, he demonstrated a similar resistance to providing me with any details in that area. As I mentioned earlier, with much prompting, he was able to relate to me that his parents divorced when he was a child. He denied that his parents had done or said anything really serious that was harmful to him. But then when I followed that up with, had he been abused physically, sexually, or emotionally, he sort of intellectualized that question and he stated, well, it's hard to define what abuse is now. And I said, well, was there anything that had really hurt you or made you feel bad or really sticks out in your mind, and to this day you still feel hurt about that? And that's when he was able to identify some of those statements that his mother made when they were arguing about not having friends or doing poorly in school.
And you indicated that one of your tasks was to interview him and make findings regarding issues related to his substance abuse. What did you learn and what did you determine based about that?
What I learned during my interview with Mr. Daniel was that he provided me with many more instances of drug abuse than he had provided in the past that was recorded, for example, in the jail documents or that he stated in the interrogation video. So to me it was the first time that I heard that he was reporting and using substances every single day. He reported pretty much every classification of drug out there that he was using and abusing, from prescription pain pills to opium to methadone to street drugs, ecstasy, Xanax, alcohol. He was stating to me at that time that he was using a handle of liquor a day, every 3 days. I asked him what that meant. He said that was about 1.75 liters of liquor every 3 days. He reported using Xanax until he would run out up to the offense, and then he reported using ecstasy as well. So that was much more reporting of drug use and abuse than what I'd previously heard.
Did it seem to you that he was more forthcoming about his drug use than any other topic you discussed with him?
Well, when I'm measuring forthcoming, I determine that by the consistency with the records, as well as the ability to and willingness to provide negative information about oneself. So in that respect, yes, he did appear more forthcoming about that, but at the same time, I'm not sure if that was for secondary gain or not.
And did you review his records, for his jail records, for evidence of symptoms of basically a dependence on drugs or alcohol?
Yes, I did.
And what sorts of things typically show up in a jail record regarding dependency of alcohol or drugs?
Usually the providers will record when the inmate is experiencing withdrawal symptoms. They're usually seen then by the jail psychiatrist and treated for those withdrawal symptoms. At times they do have to be hospitalized for withdrawal, especially from things like alcohol.
And is that standard screening procedure for new inmates?
Yes, and actually Mr. Daniel, when he was coming in, denied that he would have any difficulty withdrawing from anything.
He essentially told them that he didn't believe he would have withdrawal issues at all.
He did, yes, it's recorded.
And do the records indicate any symptoms of withdrawal?
No, they do not.
And one of the subject matters you were asked to look at was the effects of his depression and substance abuse on him before, during, and after the offense. Can you describe what you found in that regard?
Of his substance use?
The effects of his depression and substance abuse on him before, during, and after the offense.
Yes, if I can speak about each in turn, that will help to clarify that. So initially, so looking at the depression before, during, and after the offense, in my opinion, Mr. Daniel, there was no evidence to me that supported that he was depressed before, during, or after the offense. As I mentioned before, and for the reasons I mentioned before, there's no indication, there's no evidence to me, there was nothing from self-report that suggests that he met criteria at any one of those points in time for depression. So I don't believe that depression impacted him before, during, or after the offense. As far as substance abuse goes, that's a little bit more difficult to ascertain because of the varying levels of reporting over time. There are a lot of inconsistencies regarding substance use, particularly when comparing my interview with him with the records. As I mentioned, my interview of him, he reported abusing much more extensively than he had previously. So it was hard for me to reconcile what was the truth. It does appear, and it's clear to me, that he has had a long-standing history of drug use. I don't know how much it rises to the level of abuse, because drug abuse, again, has been defined by the DSM over time as has drug dependence. It is now called a substance use disorder. When it was previously referred to as substance abuse, to meet the level of abuse, just as opposed to use, the drug use had to actually impair a major area of functioning in the person's life: work, family, social activities, education. In Mr. Daniel's case, he was able to maintain a relationship for a certain period of time, and it looks to me like he was very successful in his education as well as his career. He denied having any write-ups or any problems at work beyond calling in once in a while during the interview. So while I can't rule out certainly substance abuse or potentially even substance dependence, there are some factors that indicate that it might have been more of a use or abuse, and certainly not a lot of factors that indicate a dependence from the information I have available.
So if we've heard a diagnosis of use disorder severe in institutional remission, would you agree or disagree with that?
It's possible, as I mentioned. I certainly wouldn't say severe because this is a person who is very high achieving in his career. At least from what he reported to me, there was no significant difficulties. If anything, it could be mild. There seemed to be maybe some relational impairments, but as far as severe, you need to look at that impairing many areas of life and meeting other criteria such as dependence.
And would you have any, if we've heard a diagnosis of alcohol abuse disorder in institutional remission, did you see evidence of that?
Certainly from the interview, if you accept what he was telling me at the time that I interviewed him, that he was drinking 1.7 liters of alcohol every 3 days. That's certainly possible. Again, for abuse, you've got to look at what areas of life that was significantly impacting, and it's very difficult to ascertain based on the varying information, but it's certainly possible.
And we've also heard a diagnosis of avoidant. What does that mean?
As far as avoidant personality disorder?
That was the diagnosis we were given.
Just avoidant? That's not a diagnosis.
Okay. Is what you said a diagnosis? I'm sorry.
Yes, it is. There is a diagnosis of avoidant personality disorder.
Okay. And what is that?
To have avoidant personality disorder, you have to meet the general criteria for personality pathology, and that is that you must have a degree of malfunction, an expected trait pattern of responding maladaptively to stressors in the environment that is consistent across time. With regard specifically to the avoidant type personality disorder, you must tend to avoid problems in situations. You tend to withdraw when something stresses you out or something becomes very serious. You do not face problems head on. You don't seek interaction with others.
And did you see evidence or things that led you to believe that Mr. Daniels suffered from that?
No.
And I think the final area you were asked to look at was Mr. Daniels' adjustment to incarceration.
Yes, that's correct.
Can you discuss that?
So there's a number of ways of looking at adjustment to incarceration. You can look at it first as their acceptance of being incarcerated, of the incarcerated lifestyle. The incarcerated lifestyle can be asocial, not prosocial. You can also look at it from a prosocial perspective, from a community member perspective. So I'll talk about each in turn. So if you look at adjustment to incarceration, if you look at that from the perspective of how readily he accepted the jail environment, the inmate lifestyle, that culture, his adjustment seemed pretty good. He was readily accepting of hanging out, spending time with other inmates. He didn't appear to be fearful of them. He actually requested more time with them. He reportedly referred to them as friends, played cards with them, dominoes with them. He enjoyed speaking with them. He also had gotten some write-ups. There are some types of write-ups or disciplinaries in jail that sometimes elevate a particular inmate status. So sometimes those help as far as acceptance with other inmates and adjustment to that lifestyle. His write-ups included a write-up or a disciplinary for manufacturing inmate-made alcohol, or hooch, it's referred to as here. He also received a write-up for hoarding medications or collecting medications in his cell. And he also received a write-up for making a noose. There was also some indication in the records, though he did not get a write-up for it, that he was known to provoke another inmate into engaging in behaviors that would be harmful to that other inmate. And I don't know what that was about, but I don't know if he was teasing the other inmate or what was going on. So then if you look at his adjustment to incarceration from more of a prosocial perspective, his adjustment for someone who is well-educated, has a very good career, someone who's not spent time in jail before, is a little surprising. Most people, when they experience the first incarceration and they come from more of a prosocial lifestyle, they tend to be very wary of the jail environment and isolate themselves, and they certainly don't refer to other inmates as friends. They tend to be scared of them. So that was a little interesting to me from that perspective. And then also from that perspective, you would consider the write-ups are negative in that situation.
And your early career as a psychologist was actually in the prison system in California?
That's right. I started working there January 1st, 2008.
So you've had a lot of experience with people actually in prison, in the prison society?
Oh, yes.
And you were specifically asked in this case, or specifically restricted from making any analysis or opinions as to Mr. Daniels' future dangerousness. Is that correct?
That's right.
And if you were asked to do that, what are some of the tools you would have used?
I would use a clinical interview. I would, such as I did here, but it would be more extensive. I would review the records. I might interview individuals in that person's life who've known them in the past, and then I would use specific tools that are geared towards measuring future dangerousness. In this particular case, I would use the historical clinical risk 20, HCR 20, as well as the PCLR. That's a psychopathy checklist.
And you were specifically restricted from using those tools in this case, is that right?
That's right.
And what is psychopathy?
Psychopathy is essentially, according to Dr. Hare, who sort of developed this concept, and he is the author of the PCLR, psychopathy is basically defined as asocial behaviors or not conforming to the laws, violating the rights of others, as well as affective qualities or interpersonal qualities. So the affective qualities are qualities such as a restricted or shallow range of affect, lack of empathy, being cunning and manipulative, callousness, disregard for the rights of others.
And I'll pass it this time.
Ms. Morrow, we met a moment ago, so I wanted to reintroduce myself. When you went to interview Mr. Daniel, of course you explained to him that you're working for the government, is that correct?
Yes.
And you explained to him that any kind of statements that he would give to you would likely be used against him in the trial. You told him that, didn't you?
Yes.
And that's, to be fair, you're required to do that because you do work as an agent of the government, and you essentially have to give him his Miranda warnings. Is that right?
I wouldn't use Miranda warnings. I would use their ethical disclosures that I provide all clients, no matter whether I am retained by the defense or the prosecution.
Okay. But it's similar to the Miranda warnings in that you want to tell the person, look, I'm not working for you, and anything you say might be used against you. Is that fair enough?
It's similar to that, yes, but I wouldn't refer to it as that.
Okay. And when you evaluated him as part of your report, you indicated early on that your impression of him is that his insight and his judgment were poor. Would you agree with that?
Yes, that is in regards to his insight and judgment into his mental illness.
Sure. And frankly, it's not terribly uncommon that folks who have mental diseases, mental illness, people who are divorced, I didn't mean divorced, people who are depressed, sometimes have poor insight into their depression and what causes it. Is that correct?
Sometimes they do, yes.
Okay. Some people are unable or unwilling to describe the specific symptoms that underlie their depression. Would you agree with that?
While I would agree that some people are, it would be atypical in his particular case.
Are there some people who are less likely to be forthcoming with a stranger? Do you think that's a common occurrence?
Oh, certainly.
And there's some people, probably a lot of people, who would be unlikely or maybe resistant to be real forthcoming with someone who they perceive as having motivations that are contrary to their motivations. Would you agree with that?
Certainly, that's true in all forensic cases.
And forensic cases are important because you, especially as a person working for the state, it's very important for you to be skeptical of the person that you're evaluating, like Mr. Daniel. Is that correct?
It's important for me to be skeptical in all cases, whether I am retained by the state or prosecution and whether or not I move forward in those cases.
And every mental health expert who interviews a person has to be, whether it's a defendant, whether it's a family member, or anybody else, should be somewhat skeptical of what they're hearing and want to make sure that they get adequate information to base their opinions. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And if I understand correctly, the things that you reviewed in order to prepare your testimony, which you listed in your report, of course, you reviewed the probable cause affidavit, you said.
Yes, that's right.
You reviewed the offense report.
I did not have the full offense report.
Oh, what portion of the offense report did you have?
I had the probable cause affidavit.
Oh, you just had the 2 or 3 page summary of
Yes.
the offense report. So you didn't have the full 600-page offense report?
No, I did not.
That offense report, are you aware, includes summaries of many telephone calls that Mr. Daniel had with various people, his mother, his girlfriend, his sister?
I had one, I believe, telephone call.
You had one telephone call with, if I understand correctly, it was with mom or his mother. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you didn't listen to the telephone call, you read a transcription of the telephone call?
That's what I was provided with, yes.
But that, and just to be fair, you're just reviewing what was given to you by the state, is that correct?
That's right.
So you had a transcription of one telephone call that they gave you between the defendant and his mother, is that right?
That's right.
You had, you watched the post-arrest video where they're transporting Mr. Daniel to jail. Is that
That's correct.
Did you read the version that has the subtitles so that you're able to hear what was said?
I have the version where there is a summary of statements.
Okay. So maybe the video and the subtitles hadn't been merged at that time.
No, well, that's not the version I had.
Not the version you had. And you watched Mr. Daniel's statement to the police.
Yes, I did.
Okay. You looked at a toxicology report that showed Mr. Daniel's blood level of alprazolam after the incident. Is that correct?
That's right.
You indicate in your report here that you reviewed related image crime lab report, image dated initial report 4/25/12. Is that the blood alcohol level test, or do you recall?
Yes.
You also reviewed the Walmart surveillance video. Is that correct?
That's right.
The mental health records from the jail.
That's correct.
The Brackenridge records, which have been admitted in evidence for the suicide attempt. Is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And then you interviewed Mr. Daniel on one occasion.
Yes, and I'm not sure if you mentioned the jail mental health records as well.
Yes, I believe I did, but just in case, you've reviewed the jail mental health records. Now, are you aware that in jail, Mr. Daniel is being supervised, or his mental health treatment is being overseen by a psychiatrist?
That's correct.
And a psychiatrist is a medical doctor, is that correct?
That's right.
And a person who has training and experience, in addition to being a medical doctor, they're also licensed in practicing psychiatry, is that correct?
That's right.
And psychiatrists observe people and they make diagnoses,
Yes,
similar to the way that you make diagnoses, correct?
in the same way.
You both use the same manual,
Yes,
the DSM-5 now, is that correct?
that's correct.
And based on their diagnosis, they'll develop a treatment regimen for that particular individual, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you're aware that in this case, the jail psychiatrist diagnosed, not at first, but eventually diagnosed Mr. Daniel with the severe depressive disorder, is that correct?
It's major depressive disorder. Yes.
But that is correct, it was major depressive disorder.
Yes.
And that's a psychiatrist
Yes,
who's an MD,
that's correct.
who's been working with Mr. Daniel for almost 2 years now, is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. Now, are you an MD?
I'm sorry?
Are you an MD?
No, I'm not.
You're not a medical doctor?
No, I'm not.
Are you a PhD?
No, I'm a PsyD,
You're a PsyD. What does that mean exactly?
Doctor of Psychology.
Okay. And your psychology is in school psychology, is that what I understand?
My program was accredited in school psychology, yes.
But after you finished that PsyD program, you went and worked in the prison system, is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
And that's where you got your on-the-job training after your educational training,
Well, it's called a postdoctorate. Yes.
which is essentially like on-the-job training, is that right?
Well, you're getting on-the-job training throughout your education. I worked in clinics since 2004.
Okay. Did you work in any secure facilities like prisons or youth commission or anything like that prior to that?
Prior to the prison, no.
So you're aware that a medical doctor who is a psychiatrist who's been working with Mr. Daniel for 2 years has diagnosed him with this, was it major depressive disorder or severe depressive?
Yes, major.
But that depressive disorder is in remission now because he's in jail and he's been medicated with psychiatric medications. Would you agree with that?
Now, I would disagree with that.
Because you would disagree that he was ever depressed to begin with, is that what you're saying?
That's right.
And that's based on your 2.5 hour interview with Mr. Daniel and reviewing police reports and the jail records. Is that correct?
In the jail mental health records that document the symptoms and lack of symptoms that he's displayed over the last 2 years.
So is it your position that the psychiatrist is just incorrect? Or is she lying? Is that your position?
No, it is neither. It is neither. Actually, Dr. Wagner has, the psychiatrist, has recorded in time over the records that he's not displayed symptoms. After the suicide attempt, then they began treating him differently and treating him for mental illness. They've also recorded over time throughout that time that he has displayed being untrustworthy and not being forthcoming because of that suicide attempt and the gestures that he made thereafter. It is possible, though I don't know, that she has recorded that or made that diagnosis just in response to that suicide attempt or gesture.
But she hasn't changed that diagnosis, has she?
Not to my knowledge, no.
So, I think my question was, your position is that the psychiatrist is wrong. Is your response that she is wrong or that she's not wrong?
I don't know the reason why Dr. Wagner has made that diagnosis beyond that she's made that diagnosis. She could be making that diagnosis for other reasons. There are certainly reasons in the jail to treat, not treat, diagnose, and not diagnose beyond what you would normally see in a clinical situation. And so I'm not saying that she's wrong. I don't know what her intent is behind that diagnosis.
So, but your feeling, based on reading her records and the jail records and the records of somebody who's been treating him, who for a year and a half now at least has been saying that he suffers from this major depressive disorder, you're testifying here that your opinion somehow is better than her opinion, based on reviewing the police reports and videos and a couple-hour interview with Mr. Daniel. That's your position?
I'm not saying that my opinion is better than hers. I'm saying that it's different, and she is tasked with treating him and keeping him safe. That is her job. And her diagnoses and her medications need to reflect that. My job is different. My job is to evaluate him forensically. It's different.
Your job is to evaluate him forensically for the state, correct?
Yes, that's right.
And then, of course, the state is paying you, correct?
Yes, I could have given them an unfavorable opinion.
You could have, absolutely. You're aware also that Dr. Harold Scott also interviewed Mr. Daniel on multiple occasions and came up with the same diagnosis.
I don't know what diagnosis he came up with.
Okay. Well, if Dr. Harold Scott did interview him on multiple occasions and reviewed not only the records that you reviewed, but was able to review the school records that I think you had indicated that you reviewed,
Yes.
was able to interview Mr. Daniel on multiple occasions, made attempts to contact and some success contacting collateral witnesses, and his diagnosis was major depressive disorder in remission. Would you say that that diagnosis is incorrect?
I would disagree with that.
And that's based on the information that you reviewed?
That's correct.
Okay. You would agree that the information you've reviewed is more limited than the information he's reviewed, wouldn't you?
I'm sorry.
If the information that I just represented to you is accurate, that he reviewed, you would agree that the information that you've reviewed, that you've used to base your opinion, is more limited than the information he had access to?
It could be potentially, yes.
Okay. Do you agree that in order to have a more informed opinion, it would be beneficial to have more information?
I always like to have more information.
Because you're able to better evaluate the entire situation, correct?
Yes.
So, for instance, you've indicated that Mr. Daniel did a poor job of describing symptoms that you would attribute to depression, correct?
That's correct.
If we had heard testimony in this case from the girlfriend, the 4-year-long, and I believe that Mr. Bishop asked you if Mr. Daniel had told you about a long-term relationship and that you said no. That's my recollection of your response. Is that correct?
No, I stated that he told me about having a 4-year relationship with a girlfriend.
Your first response was, did he tell you about a long-term relationship? You said no. Mr. Bishop reminded you of the 4-year relationship. Had that just slipped your mind?
I don't think that that's how I responded or how I intended to respond, but no, it had not slipped my mind.
If the 4-year relationship, if the girlfriend testified that he was depressed, and he was periodically, episodically depressed, where he would be in a complete funk, would that have been an important factor for you to know?
Not necessarily. I'm assuming that his girlfriend is not a psychologist or psychiatrist. Sometimes being in a funk can be attributed to drugs, which certainly seem to be a factor in this case. It can also be interpreted or related to certain personality pathology or being angry or upset. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is a factor related to depression.
So that's information you just would rather not hear. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm just qualifying the information.
Okay. it's possible for a trained person to take that information into account and use it as part of a diagnosis. Is that correct?
I would take the symptoms that she described and the behaviors that she described into account, yes.
But it sounds like you've already made up your mind that that's just indicative of something else, probably substance abuse.
No, I'm saying that that is something that you would have to discern. The word depression is an actual diagnosis which an untrained person does not ascribe to somebody.
And it sounds like you're saying that the suicide attempt really doesn't particularly qualify as one of those things that you look at to see depression because you don't believe it was a true suicide attempt.
In all suicide attempts, particularly in jails, suicide gestures, attempts are very often used for manipulative purposes, much more so than what you see in the community. When I worked in the jail, prison in California, I might have 15 calls a day of suicide gestures or attempts, and most of those were not legitimate. It's something that you tend to see to attempt to get a housing move or to manipulate staff, to get on psych medications so that they can sell them or use them, abuse them for drug abuse. So you certainly in all situations, but particularly in a jail or incarcerated setting, need to evaluate the purpose behind a suicide attempt. And I conceded that the attempt might certainly be with intent to die in this case. However, how I qualified that was that you also need to consider the fact that he sought treatment on his own relatively quickly.
Is it accurate to say that it's not uncommon for folks who are suicidal to attempt suicide multiple times before they're successful?
Yes, that is not uncommon. However, that's much less common phenomenon in men.
What about in children? Is it common for children to attempt to commit suicide?
It's not common for children to attempt suicide.
What about children as young as 11 to be attempting suicide? Is that common or uncommon?
Suicide rates and attempts in children are certainly increasing over the last 10 years or so, but it would still be very uncommon for a child that young to attempt suicide.
What about for children that young to be discussing their desire to commit suicide with their friends? Is that a common or uncommon occurrence?
Again, that's still, I believe that those rates are increasing, but it's still uncommon.
Would you agree that that's one of the signs you may look for determining whether a person is actually suffering from a depressive disorder?
You can certainly look at a preoccupation with death or suicide as a sign of a depressive disorder. But again, it can certainly be a sign of something else, personality disorder or some other feature in their life.
So in this case, if there had been evidence that Mr. Daniel had tried to commit suicide other than that time with the carbon monoxide inhalation, when he was as young as 11 or 13, in free world, not in an incarcerated setting, would that have some significance potentially in determining whether he had been depressed for some time?
It could. It would depend upon the purpose. For example, he did report to me that he cut himself. He was cutting, I think at 13 or 14 years old, he stated. But he stated that was not with intent to die. He reported to me that he was getting like a high off from it, a rush.
Okay. That's interesting. I appreciate your sharing that, but that wasn't really the question that I asked you. If he attempted to commit suicide at age 11 or age 13, would that be significant for determining whether he may have been depressed at that time?
It could be significant.
Okay. And if the mother's response to a child attempting to commit suicide is to tell the school to ignore it, he's just trying to get attention, is that a nurturing response or is that a more negative response, would you say?
Again, you would have to evaluate, does she have additional information that would suggest that maybe that this is some type of a manipulative behavior and maybe that's why she stated that? If not, then of course it could be a lack of nurture.
Okay. It sounds like in this case you really agree with the mother that this is merely manipulative behavior. Is that what you've been saying?
No, I'm stating I don't know. I would need to know if she had additional information with which she made that statement.
So the more information you have, typically the better opinion you can get. Would you agree with that?
Typically.
Now, if it is the case that Mr. Daniel does suffer from is it major depressive disorder or severe depressive? I can't recall.
It's major depressive disorder, and then it's qualified mild, moderate, or severe.
Let's say that's in remission because he is
sorry.
under psychiatric
Counsel,
care.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the beginning.
I'm sorry. Let's say that is now in remission. Just hypothetically, let's say a person has that disorder, it is in remission because they're taking psychiatric medications. How would that person appear? Would he appear, if it's in remission, would they appear depressed currently?
If it is in remission, no. By definition, that those symptoms have remitted.
And what in remission means the symptoms are not visible. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And what's the purpose of taking psychiatric medication?
It depends on what the medication is.
Okay. So taking antidepressant medications for a person who is depressed, what's the purpose of the antidepressant medication?
It's to reduce depression. In Mr. Daniel's specific case, one of the medications, which is also classified as an antidepressant, was also for sleep.
Okay. And so what all medications is he taking?
Celexa and Remeron,
Okay.
last I knew.
And those are both antidepressants, but you said one of them is being used for sleep.
Yes.
Okay. So if Mr. Daniel suffers from major depression, but he's in remission because of the medication, does he look different than a person who never suffered from major depression to begin with?
Can you restate that? I'm not sure what you're asking.
Sure. How can you tell, by looking at a person, by interviewing a person now, how can you tell whether they're in remission from depression because of the medication they're taking, or whether they never were depressed to begin with?
Well, it's more, there's so many answers to that, I guess, just generally. But in his specific case, the providers have not documented any change in their objective observations of him. They're reporting he's still continuing to present with a flat affect. He's not particularly forthcoming or talkative with them. He seems to be happier, more engaged now that he's allowed more freedom and less isolation. And that appeared to be that they attributed that to the reduction in his security status or observation in the
And then
jail.
freedom versus isolation, you're aware that at some time he was in a medical observation cell, is that correct?
That's right.
And medical observation cells are one-person cell where you're locked up for 23 hours a day. You may get a short period of time for recreation. Is that correct?
That's right.
And you talked about his adjustment to incarceration. It's clear he didn't like that, being locked up 23 hours a day. Is that correct?
No, hardly anybody likes that.
It's very uncomfortable. You're alone with your thoughts, and hardly anybody likes that.
That's right, yes.
In fact, there have been studies showing, recently, in fact, showing the negative effects of this solitary confinement on folks.
There have been studies for a long period of time regarding the effects of solitary confinement.
It's real hard on people, isn't it?
That's correct.
But he's also been in some less restrictive settings, is that correct?
Yes, he has.
And you had indicated that he has sought out companionship with other folks and goes out and engages with other people.
Yes, he has.
And so is it your impression that his preference is to go seek out companionship and go hang out in the day room, or his preference to hang out in his room?
Well, it's my understanding from the records and what has been recorded that he repeatedly requested to get out of that cell and to be able to have more social contact with the other inmates.
Well, it's not exactly what I asked. In a situation where he has the option of either being in his room or being in the day room, we're not talking about solitary confinement. In his room or in the day room, is it your position that his preference has been to go seek companionship and go hang out in the day room?
Most of the records indicate that he preferred to be out in the day room.
Okay. But if the jailers who testify that he really preferred to stay by himself and stay in his room, that would be an important piece of information to know, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Now, this avoidant personality disorder, does it indicate that people avoid conflict, or does it indicate that people avoid other folks?
Well, it's both.
Okay. Are people who are avoidant people who would like to be around other folks, but just not all the time?
No, they tend to avoid. That's a part of their trait pattern.
Okay. Would you agree that some folks are more expressive than others, verbally and emotionally expressive than others?
Certainly.
And there are certainly people who are introverted who don't present outwardly an awful lot. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Have a hard time talking about their feelings.
Yes, there's certainly varying degrees of introversion versus extroversion. It's a normal pattern of personality.
They have a hard time talking with strangers, for instance.
Certainly.
And there are people who are more guarded than others. Is that correct?
Yes.
And some people are really very guarded and don't like to talk about their personal private business. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But other people are less guarded, right?
Yes.
And other people may go out of their way to exaggerate symptoms, for instance. Is that accurate?
Yes, they might.
Would you agree with me that that there are many depressed individuals who would be clinically depressed, major depressive disorder, who are able to achieve in school and graduate school?
I certainly wouldn't say many. The characteristic, one of the defining characteristics of major depressive disorder is it needs to interfere with one of those major functional areas of life.
Well, what are the major functional areas of life?
Education, school, career, social activities, self-care.
Okay. So educational, I'm sorry, say that before again, please.
So educational, career, social activities, relationships, and self-care.
Okay. So educational career can mean you don't graduate, or can it mean you miss classes?
It needs to be a serious disruption of those activities.
Okay. If your depression causes you to not be able to get out of bed and not go to work, for instance, that's the kind of disruption you're talking about.
Yes, it needs to be persistent over time.
Okay. And it can be episodic, can it not?
It can be episodic with the exception that it has to meet certain episode criteria. So each episode has to be that the individuals present with low mood or depression, loss of pleasure for 2 weeks, every day, most of the day, with at least 5 additional symptoms, up to not all 9 symptoms for severely depressed individuals. The episodes refer to actual periods of time where an individual has then recovered from the depression and they have not evidenced any symptoms of depression for at least several months, but then they relapse and have another major depressive episode.
Okay. And so it's possible to be depressed, to meet the diagnostic criteria, but not exhibit that depression every single day. Is that correct?
No.
I think what you just said is you can be recurrent, you can exhibit those criteria, you can exhibit those symptoms, and then not exhibit those symptoms for an extended period of time.
Yes, but to meet qualifications for a major depressive episode to begin with, the person every day, nearly most of the day, presents for at least 2 weeks with symptoms of low mood and depression.
And is it true that some people self-medicate their way to try to treat themselves for depression?
Some people do. It's hard, though, to, it's sort of a chicken and egg argument, if you will, because a lot of drugs cause depressive symptoms, or the withdrawal effects cause somebody to feel bad. Either they feel pain, they feel low mood state, they have craving. So it's very hard to separate whether it's an actual major depressive episode or whether it is just a side effect of drug use or withdrawal. There is actually another diagnostic label to account for that.
To account for what exactly?
Low mood state due to drug use or withdrawal.
Okay. So you said it's a chicken or an egg kind of thing.
Yes.
But it certainly is possible that a person who is depressed may take medications, whether legal or illegal, that's not prescribed to them, in an attempt to alleviate the pain of depression. Is that correct?
They can.
But if they're not a trained psychiatrist, that is likely to be unsuccessful. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Because people take depressants like alcohol, Xanax, benzodiazepines when they're depressed. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that's certainly not the appropriate treatment response to a person who's depressed to begin with.
No, it's not.
You had indicated withdrawal symptoms for benzodiazepines. What are the withdrawal symptoms for benzodiazepines?
Shaking, sweating, hallucinations, extreme discomfort, sensitization to light,
Okay.
pain.
And at what point is it that a person is going to experience those if they stop taking that medication?
Usually within 24 hours.
I guess what I meant was, if, does a person have to have been using the drug every single day for 6 months to experience those, for 2 weeks, for 3 days, can you say?
Usually, yes, they have to have shown some type of tolerance, and that can be measured by needing increased amounts of the drugs to get the same effect, increased cravings. And then if they have tolerance, then it's more likely that they will show signs of withdrawal or dependency.
Okay. So, so would you agree the corollary of that is, if they show that kind of tolerance, that really indicates some extended history of use of that particular medication?
Yes,
Because that's why you develop the tolerance, is because of the history of use.
that's right.
You were discussing earlier, Mr. Daniels, after breaking up with the long-term girlfriend, Jenna Phelan. Did you know her name, Jenna Phelan?
No, I did not.
After breaking up with the long-term girlfriend, let's just say, you had indicated he threatened to kill himself with his gun. Is that correct?
Yes, he did.
And
That's what he told
is
me.
that a suicidal gesture, suicidal threat? What phrase would you use for that?
In that situation, that is a threat or a gesture because he relayed to me that he did not then attempt to kill himself with the gun, so there's no attempt there. And he also relayed that the intent there was that he hoped for her to come back to him.
Sure. And is that all he said about it?
When I questioned him further about it, if he'd ever made attempts like that or gestures before, ever hinted to her about that before, he stated that he might have hinted at that. What's his word?
Did he say anything about whether he really intended to die or wanted to die at the time?
When I asked him about whether he wanted to die or why he said that but didn't act, he stated that he was hoping that she'd come back to him.
If your report reflects Mr. Daniel recalled that he really wanted to die at the time he made the threat, but admitted that he did not act, that seems inconsistent with what you're telling us right now.
Well, it's my opinion. He did state that he intended to die, but he did not act. In follow-up questioning,
Is there a reason why you didn't say that earlier when I asked you about that?
no,
Is
because
there a reason why you didn't say that when Mr. Bishop asked you if he said anything more about this?
it's because of my overall conclusion of the totality of the statements that he made regarding
In other
that.
words, you just didn't believe him. Is that right?
The report that he provided with me is not consistent.
So you felt like it was not important to express that information to the jury when you were asked him,
It's the totality of my opinion. I didn't say it's not important.
which is based on the police report, the videos, and the limited amount of information that you see. Is that accurate?
Yes, it's based on the information that I have.
Fair enough. Your Honor, we'll pass the witness.
You indicated that sometimes things are done in the prison or jail settings to change housing or gain some benefit. Is there a specific reference to Mr. Daniel and actions he took to change his housing status,
Yes, there are in the records.
such as?
In the records, it was recorded that Mr. Daniel himself stated that he had made nooses after his first suicide attempt. He had made a noose, and he reported that he did that to, at one time, to mess with Dr. Wagner, he stated. At another time, it said that he had hoped that he would get back to a previous cell that he had had with a window that allowed for him to have radio reception.
And you indicated in one of the records, or we've heard testimony, that at one point Mr. Daniel was hoarding medication rather than taking medication. In a prison setting or a jail setting, is medication currency?
Yes.
And is that a common way to basically get benefits from other inmates in a prison setting?
Yes, they often trade medications. Normally they want a psychiatric medication for some other type of service, favor, or valuable.
And in your work in the actual prison system itself, are narcotics available?
Yes,
Are they smuggled in?
yes,
And there's access to narcotics at times in prison settings, is that correct?
pretty much all the time.
Alcohol?
Yes.
I have no further questions.
We have no further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett.
Thank you.
Stay such with
This time you're on the stage, Paul.
Your Honor, we have two brief rebuttal to rebuttal witnesses. Wendy Nesbitt.
Yes, I do.
Good morning, Ms. Nesbitt. Would you please state your full name and spell your last, please?
Wendy Lynn Nesbitt, Nesbit.
Okay, Ms. Nesbitt, where do you currently reside?
In LaPorte, Colorado?
Okay. Ms. Nesbitt, are you familiar with an individual by the name of Brandon Daniel?
Yes, I am.
Okay, how is it that you know Mr. Daniel?
He dated my daughter. He met her in Pingree Park.
Okay, who is your daughter?
Jenna Phelan?
Okay, so you are the mother of Jenna Phelan, is that correct?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Now, in order to just kind of be brief, if we could skip ahead a little bit, did there come a time when you learned about what was going on with Mr. Daniel?
Yes, I did.
And who told you about that?
Jenna, my daughter.
And did she seem, after Mr. Daniel was arrested, how did she seem to be taking that?
Very hard. She was very emotionally fragile at that point.
Okay. And did her emotional mental state cause you to do anything like come from Colorado to visit her?
Yes, I drove down to stay with her and just give her support. And I also wanted to go to the jail and visit Brandon with with Jenna.
Okay, so you knew Brandon from his relationship with Jenna, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when you came to visit her, was that shortly after the incident?
It was towards the end of April.
Okay. And so, do you know whether during that time your daughter received any letters from Brandon at all?
Yes, the whole time that I was here visiting, Jenna would go to the mailbox every morning and wait and hope for a letter. And so we went down there one morning, I walked with her and she opened up the mailbox and there was a letter and she was so excited she just sat down on the curb and opened it up.
Okay, so this letter was, do you know whether this was the first letter she ever received or the second letter? Or?
I believe it was the first.
Okay, and may I approach you on it?
Yes.
You stated that she received the letter and she was excited. How did you know that it was from Brandon Daniel?
She showed me and I saw I asked her, did they have to put all the information from the Travis County, or, that he was in jail, all that on there in those numbers.
Oh, okay. And did you actually read the letter that he wrote?
Yes, I did. She wanted me to read it as
Okay.
well.
Now, I'm going to show you what's been marked as Defense Exhibit 18 and ask you to look at it and see if you remember if that was the letter that you looked at.
Yep, this is it.
Okay. And could you look through all the pages just to be sure?
Yes, this is, Yep, these are all, this is it. This is from Brandon.
And how is it that you know that this is from Brandon in the same letter that you sent?
I've seen all, most of her letters from him because Jen and I have a really close relationship, and I'm always asking how he is and, you know, wanting to know. And in general, he always puts a hand, that handprint, there's a handprint on here, and that's, they do that as a term of endearment to each other when.
Okay, and is that just something they do, they have amongst each other?
Yes,
Okay,
and she does it to him as well.
all right. And you stated that when she got this letter, she didn't even take it to the house, she stopped right away and sat on the curb and read it?
Yes, we both did. It was really nice out, and she just wanted to sit in the sun and not go back to the apartment, and just wanted to read it right away.
Okay, thank you.
Pass the witness, Your Honor.
I have no questions.
Thank you.
This is called Jenna Phelan, Your Honor.
Yes.
Good morning, Ms. Gunn.
Good morning.
Thank you for rejoining us. I just want to ask you a few questions.
Okay.
We heard testimony about a letter you received shortly after Brandon was arrested for the incident. And can you tell me, right after you found out about Brandon being arrested for the murder, what were you going through? What were you feeling like?
It was terrible. At first, I was just really trying to get into contact with him at all. I knew I couldn't. I was just really worried about him, and so I guess I was just waiting to hear from him at all, anytime that I could. And then I had went in, and on the first Monday after that was the first day I was able to visit him, and then that's when I went. And I had written him a letter, I believe, that same Monday that I went in to visit him, and was just hoping, waiting on you know, any contact from him, because that's all I really could do.
Okay. And by waiting, were you just checking your mail?
Yeah, every day. I also brought my phone to work with me, and would just sit and watch for any different number that I didn't recognize. I'd check the mail every day. And I told my bosses at work as well, if I get a call from a strange number, I'm taking it. You know, if I need to leave, that's what's going to happen. So.
Okay. So at some point, you said that you were taking it kind of hard. I don't remember how you described it. But at some point, did your mom come down and stay with you?
Yes.
Why was that?
I think she just wanted to be here to support me. She asked if I needed her down here, and I knew my sister had a graduation coming up, and I said, it's okay, Mom, if you can, you know. And she ended up just surprising me and just came and knocked on my door in the morning and just, you know, wanted to take my mind off it a little bit.
Okay. And did there come a time when you and your mother had gone to the mailbox to check on a letter?
Yes.
Maybe you got a letter from Brandon or something?
Yes. Yeah, we checked it every day that she was here. We'd walk and go check the mail, and yeah, we went and checked, and I got that first letter from him.
Okay. And was that in, how long would you say from the time he was arrested to when you got your very first letter?
I believe he was arrested on April 6th, and I believe the postmark on the letter was the 20th, so it would have been shortly after that. So probably two weeks, maybe 3 weeks, possibly 2 or 3 weeks, real close afterwards.
All right. And so when you received the letter, what did you Right when you got it and saw it was from him, what did you do?
I just opened it immediately. I sat down on the curb right where I was and opened it and read it. I'd been waiting every day for any contact from him, so I got it and I was really happy. And my mom sat down with me and I read it first because I didn't, it was just important to me. And then we read it together and we kind of went through the letter and stuff.
Okay, your approach, Sean?
Yes.
Ms. Fannin, I'm going to show you what's been marked as Defense Exhibit 18 and see if you recognize this.
Yes, I do.
Okay, and what is this?
This is the letter that he sent me. It was, I think, a couple letters, and it came in one envelope. And it says something in the letter about that he was just waiting for an envelope, so we sent both together.
So you're saying this is really 2 letters, but it came in one envelope, and he references that in his letter that
Yes.
he's sending them both?
Yes.
Okay, and is that the envelope, a copy of the envelope that you received?
Yes.
Now, the original to this letter, where is it?
That is in Colorado.
And that's at your home in Colorado?
Yes, at my house.
All right. Now, so does this this copy fairly and accurately represent the letter that you
Yes.
received from Brandon
Yes,
Daniel?
absolutely.
All the pages and the
Yes.
envelope?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Defense would move to admit Defense Exhibit 18.
Your Honor, this is the first time we've seen this. We're going to need a few minutes to read over.